doing well. How are you this fine morning?
I'm good now.
You're good now.
Kind of
Yeah,
had
me
a
too.
kind of had a rough start, but it's going well now.
I mean, when you go love on your horse for a little bit, it's like the world is perfectly fine.
Yeah. You look a little chilly.
Very. You do too with your like 300 layers on.
Yeah, and so the funny thing about this is that um, most people in the world, other than here, would say that this is absolutely not cold. I don't even know what the temperature is, like in the 40s.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Maybe.
low 40s,
Yeah.
and we're freezing. I'm freezing when it's under like
80.
80. Yeah,
We're Arizonians.
yeah.
It's easy
Southern
to
Arizonians.
Southern Arizonians. It's
Yes.
easy to feel freezing when it's not actually freezing. So today we're going to be just talking about training methods, different horse training methods, and with not much bias, even though we kind of are biased, but we're going to kind of keep that out. We're going to talk about the differences between natural horsemanship or negative reinforcement or natural horsemanship training and clicking and treating positive reinforcement. I do the air quotes because these methods are called all sorts of different things.
Yeah, and let's start with
Uh,
that because I kind of have a problem personally with
the negative.
the use of the terms negative and positive.
Yeah. It's just like, it's pretty much saying that's right and that's wrong, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So, but I don't, however, mind the term natural horsemanship.
Well, unpack that a little bit. Where did that come from?
Well, the natural horsemanship training, I've heard it came from, I guess, how horses treat each other most like naturally in the wild, and then this dates back to way back when people started domesticating the animals. I'm assuming that's where that stems from.
Well, and I think I read
I remember
not
we read something
in
on
in
it.
the evidence-based horsemanship book. I think that's where I got it from. It might have been an article, but I'm pretty sure in evidence-based horsemanship, he talks about one of the leaders or founders or people who coined the term natural horsemanship. I think it was Ray Hunt.
Really?
I think.
Huh.
Let us know if that's wrong. Shoot us a message or an email or something because clearly, just by in this far in our discussion, we are not experts on horse training.
Yeah.
However, I say that, and then as I say that, I'm like, yes, we are.
That we specialize in
So,
a few
what?
different topics.
Yeah, what I mean by we're not experts is that I can't confidently say, oh, I've got so much experience, and therefore this is the way to go. However, just the past 6 months or so, maybe even less than that, what I've found in just my willingness to be open to trying different things has totally reshaped my relationship with my horse Cody.
Yeah, and that's the same. Willow's my second horse. Mocha, I didn't get to experience the clicking and treating training method with her, but it's like a much stronger connection with my new horse Willow than I think I ever had with Mocha. And I mean, one could say, I've heard it a few times, Mustangs are a one-person horse, so they kind of bond with their trainer no matter what ways they're being trained. So maybe a lot of it is the fact that Willow's a Mustang and she's a one-person horse, and
Yeah,
she,
I kind of have a hard time with that generalization as
yeah,
well because the more I spend time with Willow, the less I feel that one person connection.
yeah,
I mean, this morning's a perfect example. I, when I think of she's a one person horse and that's it, and we kind of lock them into that confine or that confinement of training and relationship, then to me it would be like she would either totally resist working with somebody else like me or she would be looking for you or anticipating you and otherwise not paying attention to me, and that's not the case.
Mm-hmm.
But that might just be a function in her willingness and ability, might just be a function of the training method and style that you've chosen.
That's a possibility.
And the fact that via that training method, it affords her the opportunity to have a choice and to make choices.
Mm-hmm.
And then ultimately, it doesn't really matter in her mind who she's actually working with.
Yeah.
I mean, now let's be fair. You are much more fluid and connected with her than I am at this point, but she's not just your horse in that way. Like she's willing and able to work with other people, including myself.
And that's good. Like I need, that's one thing I need her to be able to do for veterinarian, farrier. Right. I mean, people that are of necessity. But
so let's kind of, you want to go through like a compare and contrast or a pro and con?
Yeah.
And we don't have like a formulated list put together. We're just going to kind of ad-lib this. But let's start with the so-called negative reinforcement.
I think we should rephrase that. I mean, because I've heard it been said so many ways. I mean, Maddie's term is typically negative reinforcement for the natural horsemanship methods, the pressure and release methods, the methods that don't necessarily give the horse a lot of choice, and the use of pressure and release, which is the most common, natural horsemanship method.
So let's unpack that a little bit from the perspective of pressure and release. What do you actually mean by that?
So pressure
what's
and
going
release,
on?
I guess I'll go into an example here. When round penning a horse, those of you who are, have horses are probably really familiar with the term round penning.
And by the way, let me interject.
Yeah, interject.
On the term round pen, and even the round pen in general, I have a huge problem with at this point in my horsemanship journey, because and this goes into using terminology and ultimately pushing that onto the horse based on like our human agendas.
Yeah.
And we've talked about in our previous session expectations, so you might want to check that out. But the round pen is like one of the most unnatural places that a horse can be trained. Fair?
Fair.
They are not made, even though their brain is such that the majority of their brain is composed and structured in a way that helps them with their physical body and movement and balance. They are not made, whether their body physically and their mind, to run around in a circle continuously.
Yep.
So that's one con that I have when it comes to the negative reinforcement training, natural horsemanship, whatever you want to call it. Throwing or placing or leading your horse into a round pen and applying a bunch of pressure with a whip or your movement or your energy in your body, and then releasing that certainly is not natural in my mind.
Yeah. And one may say, but the pressure is quite natural in the way that horses give each other pressure when they're out in the wild, which I can only partially agree with. I've learned, and I haven't done research on it per se, but I've read a few articles, and Maddie's Horse Human Connection Academy talks a little bit about horses in the wild and how they interact, and it's mostly like an ask before the pressure, and an ask being, hey, that's my grass. A horse will pin her ears at the younger horse that's eating the grass that she wants, and if the younger horse doesn't move away, the mare's gonna she might charge at him or turn her butt toward him and warn him that she's gonna kick, and if
AKA applying pressure at that
applying
point.
pressure, and then if he still doesn't move, he's gonna get his butt kicked by the mare.
But what I just heard you say is that the horse in the natural setting asks first?
Is gonna warn and ask before the pressure is. It's not just, hey, that's mine, let me kill you just so I can have it. It's, hey, that's mine. Would you mind moving away from here? I said move. I said move. Now I'm gonna tap you with my foot because you ain't moving.
So in that respect, I can understand where humans come in and we're like, okay, we're gonna emulate this process.
Yeah.
And I don't have a problem with it really, other than the fact that all right, so both of our horses, talking about Mocha, your prior quarter horse mare, and our current Cody, who's a domestic Bashkir Curly, they both had typical natural horsemanship training methods.
Yeah.
Now they're both about this. If Mocha was still alive, they were both about the same age, right? Give or take a couple years.
Yeah.
So 9, 10, 11 years old,
Mocha's
somewhere in there.
13.
Oh, really?
So Cody's 10.
I'm so like jacked up when it comes to dates and times, aren't I? Okay.
Mocha would have been 13.
So they're.
We estimate Cody's about 10.
My point is, they're roughly
same
in the same age. They've had a significant amount of training in that way, prior to us getting them. And so where I'm going with that is when we shedded or turned off that style of training and replaced it with what we would call positive reinforcement, it's like, to me, the whole paradigm shifted in the way of connection and relationship with our horses.
Yeah. And that's a big, that is, like, I can 100% agree. I felt the same way with my mare Willow, and even with a little bit that I've done with Cody, like, it's completely different than it was. Like, Cody, and I'm using him as an example, he was very difficult to work with.
Yeah.
When he first came home, and that's...
and he wasn't mean, like the kicky, bucky,
he was just
biting.
shut down.
Yeah.
Cody, I mean, he was always very difficult to get, like, to push around the round pen.
Right.
He would walk, trot when he wanted to, canter when he wanted to, and then he would mostly walk.
And so correct me
Mocha,
if I'm wrong, because you know a good amount more about this than I do. And we had even talked about this when we were training Cody and trying to get the rust spots out in his training at that point, using natural horsemanship. And I was like, and I told you from the very beginning, even with Mocha, I was like, I don't like natural horsemanship. I don't like getting in a round pen, standing in the middle, and like having to apply pressure. It was just boring to me. It felt like running on a treadmill. And I would much rather, from like using that analogy, I'd much rather run like out on a trail in the mountains and see the scenery and pick and choose where I go versus running on a treadmill in a stinky gym.
Yeah.
And so that's how the round pen started feeling to me. It's like, all right, let's go in the round pen, and then you cluck and like get him to trot, and then he doesn't trot. Okay, let's apply more pressure. And I'm sure there's plenty of people out there that could have fixed his problems using natural horsemanship techniques that I just wasn't that great at, perhaps.
Maybe.
But when the eureka moment came on and said, like, all right, well, I don't actually have to use that.
Yeah.
There's other ways. And then we turn that off. It's like his whole demeanor changed. And I guess we're being biased in this. It's like the message is like, we don't know what we know until we know.
Yeah. And horses, I mean, like any other being, we're very dynamic creatures, and I say we like every living thing. We may be habitual. I mean, I'm a habitual person. I get up every morning, I go get ready for the day, I brush my teeth, I come out to my horse.
It's a good thing you brush your teeth.
Yeah, that's a good thing. I mean, yeah, thanks. But I mean, it's a pretty. I mean, the day goes on. We only have a certain amount of hours before it's time for bed, and I kind of develop some sort of schedule, if you will. The horses are the same way. They sleep for like 2 hours, 3 hours at night. They get up, they eat, they drink, they eat, they drink, they poop, they eat, they drink. Time to go on a walk, they walk with us. They go back to their pen, they eat, they drink, they poop. It's like they're very habitual. So I find with like most natural horsemanship, I guess schedules, if you will, it's very like, let's get the horse out, let's take them in the round pen, get their energy out, make them face up with me, throw the saddle on. Maybe if I have work in an hour, I'm gonna go on a really short trail ride around my property. If I have nothing else to do, we're gonna trailer, we're gonna go somewhere in the mountains, we're gonna come back, unsaddle, put the horse in the pen. Some people will reward with treats after the ride. Others are completely against treats. I've known people that are both ways.
I've known people that would do all that, go on a ride, and then their horse doesn't get fed until dinner time that night.
Yeah, and but it's a very, like, I don't feel like in much of the natural horsemanship methods, like, the horse is getting much benefit out of any of it. Maybe she's getting exercise, but is it exercise that she enjoys?
You just said that the horse is getting very much benefit out of it. That's an interesting concept.
And I see, I was, when I started with Mocha, it was very, my trainer was very natural horsemanship trained, and she was training me to be very natural horsemanship trained. And I've quickly, with getting into the quote positive reinforcement training with Willow and Cody, you don't have to make them move their feet. In fact, I found better with, and I said I'm trying not to be biased here, so I'm gonna just go a different route here. When the horse is given a choice, when she's asked and there's no pressure involved, once she decides that she can say no, you'll see a yes a lot more. I've seen that I've seen that with experience. I've gone through the course, and Maddie mentions that. I've heard other people talk about that. Once they're given a choice to say no, they're gonna say yes.
More often.
Yeah, more often.
And
which is really cool.
The really interesting thing about that to me is the fact that there are plenty of people out there, and we've rubbed shoulders with people who are just like, a horse will always say no. And like just this morning, my horse said no a few times, but he said yes so much more.
Yeah.
And it's a clear 100% yes and no. They understand what yes and no is. Maybe not in the same conceptual reality that we have, and we've talked about that a bit, about their brain makeup and the way that they process thoughts.
It's different than
so
us.
I'm not going to venture out and say that I fully understand that, because I don't. It's different. But when we meet them where they are and how they are, in my mind first, like you get an unruly wild horse who's just like kicky and bucky and going all over the place.
I'd love
So
one of those.
Natural horsemanship would say apply pressure, apply pressure, apply pressure until the horse submits. Then we would translate that as respect, which I disagree with.
That's another topic.
Yeah, that's a complete respect and disrespect. We're going to have a session just talking respect and disrespect alone, because there's a lot of neuroscience that comes into that. And a lot of people out there who are saying that their horse is disrespecting them, just, I'll be blunt, clearly do not understand the horse's brain.
Yeah.
From a neuroscience perspective, and I'm not a neuroscientist, but like you just read just the basics on it. A horse doesn't know respect and disrespect.
Yeah,
They don't reason that way.
can't.
So get off my soapbox there, and just like you get a blank slate, unruly, wild horse. In my mind, the first thing that we are trying to do, regardless of training method, is to establish that we are not a life threat to that being.
Yeah.
So, and I had an epiphany yesterday about this. Like, I was trying to think, like, is Cody respecting me or disrespecting, and kind of playing that through. And like, well, science says, that reasoning aspect isn't necessarily there in their brain. And it's really simple in my mind. They've established the fact that we aren't a threat to them.
Yeah.
So what that does is opens up the communication for us to be able to teach them, and a positive or a pro to the positive reinforcement methodology is that in simplicity, we're just giving them a choice as to whether or not they move forward at the speed of their own brain.
Yeah, and I would agree. And I mean, I kind of put myself, or try my best to put myself in the animal's shoes. I mean,
which, by the way, the horse's brain is not able to empathize with us.
Yeah, and that's true.
So that's a really so we're
like the choice aspect of it. Like if we were, I don't know, like give me a choice. Alyssa, do you want to go ride your horse today, or do you want to come and help build the house? Come on, guys. I want to go ride my horse. That's a choice. Is that the wrong choice? Well, no. Is that the right choice? Well, probably not either. I mean, it's very similar. Like the animals, the horses, they want to be given a choice. Willow, do you want to be brushed, or do you want to go on a walk? Well, I kind of want to go on a walk. Okay, let's do that, and then I'll brush you later. And I mean, it's like.
So don't you think that lends itself to kind of this like lackadaisical attitude of like you just let your horse do whatever it wants?
Well, that's a really good point. So I love that you bring that up. Thank you. So a lot of people may say, okay, well, you're giving your horse a choice. They are always choosing. They're always doing whatever the heck they want. Where's the discipline? My opinion is the discipline comes with trust and communication, and I'm not even saying like lack of pressure, because I have used pressure on Willow before, but it's how we teach it.
Yeah.
It's how we teach the discipline. I mean, a great example, one that I've really, I mean, I'm also training a puppy, and she is not potty trained yet, and I guess last night she peed on a blanket, and I was like I was so upset, and I didn't take it out on her, but most people would go and hit the dog and show the pee to them and tell them you don't do that.
Well, I wouldn't say most people would do that.
Some people would. I know a few people that would. And it's just like, so why are we hitting them? Like we don't want to hit them. They don't know. They really don't know. So I mean, with disciplining a horse, it's the same thing. Like if there's grass around and you don't want a meeting, they don't know that you don't want a meeting. I mean, like when you're on a walk with Cody and he decides to snatch grass, are you looking at him and telling him to get the grass or not to get the grass?
And they're not reasoning that way. They're just like, look around behind us. There's like food everywhere. Yeah. And yes, they can eat this grass. It's not the most nutritious for them, but they like it.
And they don't understand. No, don't eat that grass, Willow.
Right.
So it's like, I guess I guess that brings me to the point, like the way we discipline them, not that they're allowed to do everything they want all the time, but it's the baby steps in telling them no and helping them understand what the no is.
And to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the more we give them choice and they choose, and then we're rewarding the choices that we're directing them, that we'd like them to choose, the more we're rewarding that, they're getting there's chemical reactions going on in their brain. They're getting a dopamine hit,
Mm-hmm.
so they're feeling good about it. And then they're like, oh, well, that felt good. Food, yum, good, feels good. And they keep cycling back around, and that's how I understand the term duration. So like if you're trying to get them, let's use an example like stand to be brushed. And so the idea is like, oh well, if you treat your horse, then all they're gonna want to have is like snacks all the time. That has not been our observation. In fact, I've gotten to a point we both have with our horses where now just it's like it clicks. We've treated them and reinforced that standing in position so much, and they've gotten so much positive feedback in their own brain chemistry that now it just feels good for them to stand calm to
And
be
be
brushed
Yeah.
without any treats whatsoever.
Yeah, and then so I guess the discipline in that scenario would be, well, my horse is backing up when I brush her and her ears are pinned. I don't want to be brushed. Um, One may ask, well, then would you reinforce her for saying no that way? And from my personal experience and what I've learned is no, I'm not going to reinforce the backup, but I'm also going to respect her choice, and I'm not going to keep brushing her as she's backing farther and farther away from me. Maybe I'll stop and I'll ask her to say no thank you with her, how she knows how to say no thank you, and in our case it's standing chill.
Mm-hmm.
And I do talk about that in my Alyssa Mustang's YouTube videos if
Mm-hmm.
you guys want to check that out. But so, I mean, Willow and Cody both know standing chill is no thank you. If she does by chance happen to back up instead of say no thank you, then I'll pause, I'll stop brushing, I'll treat her forward, and so I'll have her come up and target my hand, take a step, where she was standing.
And that's
Treat her
called
for that.
redirection.
Yeah, that can be redirection, or it's, simply targeting them forward.
Right.
And then I'll cue her to say no thank you, and then I will reinforce her for saying no thank you. Then hopefully the next time I go and brush her, she'll, oh, no thank you. She'll get reinforced for the no thank you, and then we can go in this.
In this whole process, just on the very basics that I've been reading about their neuroscience and their brain makeup versus it kind of confuses me because what I get from their neurological makeup is that they don't have a whole heck of a lot of reasoning skills. Like that frontal lobe of their brain is very much smaller than ours in relation to total brain size. But what I gather from it is that it's their brain makeup isn't saying that they have absolutely zero reasoning skills. It's just they don't have the reasoning skills that we do. And so when they're given a choice, and being able to reinforce those positive and even the or the yes and no choices, I don't know. They just catch on to it.
Yeah.
And it just makes sense for them and it makes sense for us. So going back to the beginning of kind of the pro and con, in my mind, the pro to what we would say positive reinforcement or click and treat method of training is the fact that, to just put it plainly, it just seems to work really well. That could just be a function of you and me and how we operate, but my hunch is that it just works a lot better for the horses. And there's plenty of stories outside of you and me that, Maddie's one, but plenty of people have had so many, like, these horses are destined for euthanasia, to the extent that they're uncontrollable and nobody wants them and they can't be taught anything. And, a few months or longer down the road, people are riding them bareback and bridleless, so there's that. Whereas a lot of times, and we even had, I even had a veterinarian make a comment to me uh, recently about like how uh, she's an equine veterinarian and rolling in to different sites where natural horsemanship methods when it comes to actually treating an animal for a medical condition actually causes a lot of problems. Um, Whereas, her opinion is like positive reinforcement, so long as the veterinarian or professional is willing and able to be open to that idea, calms the whole process down and gives the horse a lot more latitude to make decisions and feel better about
Yeah,
themselves.
and I mean, I even experienced that firsthand with taking a wild horse's vitals for the first time. I mean, like
Yeah.
it's not easy, and I'm not like I'm training a horse. I think any horse, and I can't really say that because I'm only training one. She's my first horse. I've not trained another yet. But it's not easy. And it's like I love it, but it's also dangerous. It's also hard. It's sad. It's scary. But then it does. I mean, it's fun and it's enjoyable and it's um I mean, like for me, like I have a blank slate that I'm taking care of, that I'm helping, that I'm training, and she is 1,000 pounds greater than I am. Like she could kill me in an instant. And for I mean, some people like
So
that's
therefore,
dangerous, that's scary.
yeah, so therefore you absolutely have no control whether you like to
Yeah.
paint a picture of you having control or not.
Yeah, and I mean, she's stronger than I am. She could I mean, like the sky's the limit as to what she can do, but she's like I don't even know what it is in her brain, but to me it's trust and connection that she just quote submits to me, and it's not like I'm your alpha, you're gonna run if you don't. It's like, hey, I love you, I'm gonna put my head down so you can scratch me. Hey, I love you, I'm gonna lay down with you
And I
because I
would say
love
that
you.
term love perhaps is
And maybe
our own
it's different.
humanistic
Yeah.
construct. Like I don't even know, but I feel the same way.
Yeah.
It's like there
That's how
there's
I
there's
interpret
something
it.
quite spiritual and emotional, and I've been questioning this with you a lot. It was like, is it really the horse is saying that I love you, or is it just how we interpret their behaviors?
Yeah,
And the
we're so
verdict's out
different.
on it. Like, who knows?
Yeah,
Like,
we're so different, but
um,
we're so like.
and this comes back. I saw a post yesterday on Facebook was like, um uh like horses meet us where we are,
Yeah.
and then uh my opinion is also like to piggyback on that, like communication, strong, effective, long-term communication and friendship comes about between the horse and human only in as much as we're able and willing to meet them where they are.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of training methods uh, prioritize our humanistic expectations above and beyond that process alone.
Yeah.
And so if we were to, you know, take a step back and really think about, where the horse is at, and because you and I both, like, over the past week have had a lot of questions pop up from other people about how do I get this unruly horse to trust me, or how do I get this horse to do this and that. And a lot of those questions are with good intent, but right off the bat the question is prioritizing the human's expectations.
Yeah.
Where most of the time my response to those questions and your response to those questions is something like, understand where the horse is at right now and take the time to really back up, and maybe we got to go back all the way to the beginning.
Meet her where she's at. She doesn't have to. You don't have to saddle her for the first time in a month.
Right.
Like, you think you do, but you don't.
And there's like this race,
Yeah.
like,
And
oh, I'm
it's
so much better as a horseman or horsewoman
the quicker I
because
can get the saddle
because
on a
I
horse and ride
because
it.
I'm riding in 3 days.
Yeah.
Using the example of a Mustang right out of the wild, or 25 days or 30 days or 100 days. Like, let's take the timeline out of it and like really just meet that horse where it's at, regardless of what training method you're
Yeah,
using.
exactly.
And really just like concentrate on listening to that horse and throttling the expectations that you have for your relationship down a few notches or all the way back down to zero and start from scratch.
Yeah.
That's what I did with Cody, and it's taken a month, maybe
Yeah.
a little bit more than that, to get to a point where I ask him now, hey Cody, do you mind if I ride? And and he does. Like, I have trained him like a step back is okay for no in that respect. And if he wants, if he's ready and comfortable for me riding, he just lateral
Turn his
flexes
head.
into me, and it's good. And
Yeah.
then, because since I've had him, I would just go throw the saddle on, go to mount. He would take a step back, and I'd be like,
Just keep backing up.
back up, and keep applying that until he stops, and then I would mount, and then, but that didn't get me very far.
Yeah. But I mean, I guess to go back to the pros and cons of negative and positive reinforcement. So we did a pro for positive and a con for negative. Now we've got to find a pro for negative and a con for positive. I think, and I think I've got a pretty interesting con for positive reinforcement, as many would say it takes a lot longer than typical natural horsemanship methods. You've mentioned this, I've mentioned this, there are other people who have mentioned this. I want to saddle my horse in 25 days from now. How can I do that using positive reinforcement? Um, well, you might be able to if your horse is ready for it. If not, you can't. And that's just like, because if you really want to rush the riding process, I mean, if you really want to rush anything, like you can't. I mean, we can't really rush things around the horses because we're gonna make them upset
Well,
and
isn't this
agitated.
where the whole term like breaking comes to mind?
I think
So,
so.
so I think, like, in that way, like, breaking a horse is about like getting, and I could be totally wrong here, but getting it ready to go to work, not recreational trail ride. I mean,
Yeah.
it, from what I gather, this terminology comes from like back when horses were like our work partners,
Mm-hmm.
be it transportation of some kind or farm work or ranch work or stuff like that. um it you know and I've had that question. I've mentioned it to you a number of times, like, in the work setting, is there a need for a quicker way of training? Your response has been probably not, which I agree with. um but that's kind of the only, and I agree, kind of the con from positive reinforcement. It does seem to take a little bit more time, but I would caution that statement and preface it with, it takes more time perhaps on the front end.
Yeah.
Because what I've seen is it's like, if we drew a graph and we're going like this, and so the y-axis would be like their app or their comprehension and actually like learning.
Mm-hmm.
So in the early stages of positive reinforcement, the slope is very slow, but then to me it just seems like it skyrockets.
Yeah.
Whereas negative reinforcement, applying pressure, release, and those types of things, like, I think you get a much steeper curve initially. But I found, firsthand, getting Cody had already had that baseline of training.
Mm-hmm.
So he was like really plateaued and rusty. And so then I took him a little bit on it, and then he plateaued again. And I'm just like, well, what? Do I just like keep applying the pressure? And the common thread of wisdom that I got from people and reading in that realm of training is like, absolutely yes. Like, remember we went through the course and it's like bid him up, you know, get him soft at the pole and blah blah blah, and like applying pressure, release, pressure, release. Eventually he'll get it. To me, that took a lot of time. He was super uncomfortable. I could feel the discomfort coming from him, but I'm like, all right, well, this is what people do, and this is the right way to go about it. Um, so yeah, I would agree. The con from a negative or a positive reinforcement perspective would be more time, but my opinion is initially. Um, and then what were you saying? A pro for negative reinforcement?
Negative reinforcement. Let's see. Because we've had our, I mean, we've been in the negative reinforcement realm. Or the natural horsemanship realm. We've trained a little bit that way. I mean, we've worked with horses that way that are trained. So I mean, um, they, I feel like horses are a lot softer when they're trained using the natural horsemanship realm. And by softer, I mean that they're a lot like they whisper quieter than they do when they're trained better. They talk quieter. They express themselves at a lower rate.
Using
Using
pressure release.
Pressure and release.
Interesting.
And I say that's like an interesting pro and con. I mean, it could go both ways, but that would be a pro if someone was able to tone in and listen to the horse. And
so, are you talking about in
this?
We've mentioned, or I think I mentioned in my story that's coming up on where I got started in horses. I was about your age, and I didn't know this was my start, but clearly I was riding a horse on the beach in Mexico, and that's my earliest recollection of actually like riding a horse. That's the only time I rode a horse as a kid, and even up until recently, right? Anyways, so are you saying because those particular horses is they're in a frame of mind what we would call shut down, like they've had so much pressure applied to them, and the term broken is perfect for those types of horses because they do absolutely nothing unless their owner and they're programmed, and it is a function of applying so much pressure, and even what we would now consider and it's not natural horsemanship, it's actually a precursor, or it goes, the methods before natural horsemanship where you would tie and chain even, and actually literally break the thinking methods of the horse and the spirit of the horse. And so is that what you're referring to when you say that they're quieter? Like they just don't have a lot of expression?
Yeah, and they can't. I mean, think about it. When a horse
It's interesting that you make that a pro and a con, though.
I say it's a pro and
I see
a con
where you're going at with it.
You'd have to be the right person, and you'd have to have the right mindset to listen to them. And I say that because if that horse that you were riding decided that he wanted to trot instead of walk, he'd get his butt whipped.
So this is kind of where I hear you going with this is kind of that, like the book Breaking Not or Making Not Breaking, sorry. Making Not Breaking comes in to where you're into it, and you're applying just the perfect, like baking a cake. Like it's a recipe. You're applying just the amount of pressure for the situation and releasing at the perfect time so that you're not applying an excessive amount of pressure to quote unquote break that horse.
Yeah, and so you're able to tone into what they really need in that moment, rather than the horse tossed his head and I have no idea why, but I'm gonna make him back up for it and back up for it until he stops tossing his head.
Right.
But then instead, because maybe that head toss was ever so slightly just to say the cinch is off, the cinch is uncomfortable. So maybe that rider stops, gets off the horse, and examines the tack adjust the cinch, and the horse licks his lips. The
And
horse
to be
puts his head
fair,
down.
so our trainer initially, who we purchased Mocha from, in my mind was exceptional at that.
She was really good at being able to communicate with them.
And
I
to
mean,
read the horse, and she was very pressure release
yeah,
oriented trainer. And in fact, she's one of at least a handful that have been like absolutely not, never
never treats.
treat a horse. Which a couple years later had a conversation, you did, right,
Yeah.
about that, from trailering Mocha, and she was actually receptive to the positive in fact,
Yeah.
didn't she mention it to you as a possibility?
She was the one who mentioned Mustang Maddie to me,
Ah, interesting.
which was,
Yeah.
but she didn't, from how I understood it, she didn't like go into depth in it. She just got like the trailering portion of it, and she was explaining to me that it made the horse a lot more comfortable trailering, which is really
That's
interesting.
So you have somebody in that's a good segue from what you were talking about. Like, and what I'm hearing you say is, like, so long as you are very focused and intent on not applying too much pressure and releasing at the perfect time, then it can work. And so that's your pro.
Yeah. And
But I'm gonna follow up with that and say, in my opinion, given allowing the horse to have a choice and using positive reinforcement techniques, or click and treating, if you will, and we could even take it a little further, talking about, and we're going to talk more about this as we move along, but James French's trust technique, where it's basic, it it's not using treats at all necessarily.
the dude rides, quote,
The-
naked
yeah,
horses.
But the treat in that situation is a calm mind.
Yeah, it's awesome.
That the horses and other animals, by the way, are very intuitive, and they pick up on that much better than we do.
He was riding on one of the ads to, wasn't it one of the ads
To the course, yeah.
He was riding this, I think it was a paint mare who was a rescue, and the horse had no tack whatsoever, and he's just sitting on the horse, like riding in the woods, and there was like a
The
herd of like 6, 7
Right.
to 10 horses are just following him, and
Right.
they don't have any tack either. And I was just like, man, like,
Goals.
I
Hashtag goals.
hashtag goals. Yeah. But yeah, so that's another conversation.
Yeah.
Um,
So
but yeah,
let's wrap this up, and thank you guys if you stuck around this long in this session, because we've really kind of gone all over the place, and you can tell our passion around training methods and our inquisitiveness, if that's even a word. Like, we're really curious. I'm curious. I'd love to hear from you, in a way that shares the pros and cons of your chosen training method.
yeah, and why?
Yeah, and why. And so you can shoot us an email, podcast@reinforcethehorse.com, or look us up on Facebook. We have a Facebook group called Reinforce the Horse.
Yep.
And there's only about 40 people in it right now. I'm really the only one that posts stuff, so it'd be cool to get some other activity in there, and in a no-nonsense, sort of non-judgmental area for people to discuss all things related to
Horses.
reinforcing the horse, be it using click and treating methods or other methods that you might feel are better, or more appropriate.
And I'll agree.
Yeah. So do we have anything else to shoot out there?
I hope you guys had a happy holidays,
Yeah.
and yeah, thanks so much for sticking around this long, and we will see you guys with another episode next week.
Have a good one.